All right, so in the previous section, we learned how we can create areas very quickly to be able to prototype and learn how our gameplay works. Now, this is a great tool, and it's especially good when you're trying to make something man-made, buildings, houses, streets, space stations. But there are also other things in the world that are organic, things like hills, which can lead to issues when trying to build it in that way. So over the course of this section, we're going to explore the ways that we can use Unity's terrain system to add more organic feeling areas in our levels. In this section, we're going to first learn what a terrain is. We're going to learn how do we create them, and then we're going to learn how to make our environments look a little more lifelike. We're going to add trees, water, grass, and we're also going to learn how we can build the atmosphere to our world by using skyboxes as well as fog, and maybe we'll throw in some post-processing effects as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so terrain, as we mentioned before, is basically anything that's non-man-made, so things like hills, deserts, mountains, so on and so forth. Unity's way of dealing with terrains is different than what other engines typically do, and the fact that there are two general ways that we can make them. One being using a height map, and the other is building the map from scratch using Unity's terrain tools. Note that it's also possible to create terrains by programming, by making use of the terrain data class, but for our purposes, we're going to dive more into the height maps as well as the hand sculpting, which are things that level designers will typically be using. Now, height maps are a common way for game engines to support terrain. And in fact, rather than creating tools to build the terrain within the level, the artist or designer can go use a graphic design software such as Photoshop to create a grayscale image. And then we use this grayscale image in order to draw our terrain. Now, we've actually already seen an example of this kind of method. Inside Unity here, you'll notice we have the UFPS_clean scene that we used previously over the course of this course, which is located in the UFPS base content levels clean scene folder. And inside here, you'll see that there's an object called terrain. And that is this whole guy right here, this object. Now, all of these hills and things that we see inside here is actually information that was passed by a height map. And you can actually see this height map. Go into the terrain folder, you'll see that there is this terrain section, which is this object's information, but there's also this height map file. And if you right-click and go ahead and say Show in Explorer, you'll see it in your files. And in my case, this height map is of type raw. And I can actually open this inside of Photoshop. And we can go through here, go ahead and select Photoshop. We'll hit OK. So in bringing in Photoshop, it has some options for us. I'm just going to go ahead and say OK. And you'll see that we have this image right here. And this is actually a description of how the image should be drawn. Now, the lighter values, the whiter values within the height map are calculated to make the terrain taller, whereas dark gray and black values convert to be lower. And generally speaking, black is the lowest and white is the highest in terms of creating the altitude for our terrain. And if you go to the terrain object and we go to the last section here, you'll see that at the bottom, there's a section where you can say import raw and export raw. And this importing is where we can modify what this terrain does. And the terrain height property is what we use in order to set what the tallest thing can be over our image. So if I were to change this to something like 400, now you'll notice that there's a much deeper change between the things that are here. Now, the other way for us to create a terrain is to instead do it by hand. And that's what we're going to be doing over the course of this section.